here. This is a wonderfully exciting event for the Colin neighbourhood. I'm Rosemary Stalker. I'm the new chair of the Colin Neighbourhood Partnership, and what an exciting time to join you all.
I feel so honoured to be here because the event that Rosemary's speaking about, that I apparently was so inspirational, I left inspired by Annie's story of a community that was attempting to come together, and it captured that with a statue of young people connected. And I want you to know I've been telling your story and the story of that artwork. What statue doesn't seem to capture it. I've been telling that to other people as a way of trying to symbolize what communities can do. And when Annie told the story, I thought, I want to go there someday. So be careful what you wish for. It often comes true. So what I wanted to do was to give you just a brief insight into why what you are doing in Colin is both radical and wise. Or I might have called it this, that as an early intervention community, you are paving your streets in love. As a scientist, I suppose the key thing I want to do is to help us to take love more seriously. Because in that way, it seems both more simple and more radical to realize that what you're talking about is love. Now, I am invited increasingly to go to a number of places really to talk about love. And the way in which I try to capture that message about why early intervention is so powerful and so important and so lasting and so radical and so wise is because of these three components. If we understand that babies come into the world already connected, that they don't need to develop relationships, that they come into the world already in relationship, and then we understand a bit about the neuroscience, which tells us about how their brains develop, we can then think about the implications that that holds for society and why we all suffer if our babies, and indeed we, don't feel connected. So what I wanted to do in a very brief amount of time is to try to just give you some insights and to take you through those steps so that you understand really what you are doing in the streets of Colin. Does that sound okay to you? Yeah. Okay then. All right. And I always like to say thank you to my colleagues and students who's helped with all of this work, but they're the ones who are rain when I left this morning and it's sunny here. Right. So what do I mean when I say babies arrive already connected to other people? What I mean is this. I want to show this very short video of a 3-month-old baby showing how tuned in to his mom he is when she's carrying on a conversation with him, and how tuned in he is when she stops talking, and how obvious it is that he becomes uncomfortable simply because his mom stopped engaging in a conversation with him at only 3 months old. And when the...
Just how crucial the first year is to a child's future development is emerging here at Dundee University.
What we're going to do is get you just to interact with Bridger, just as you normally would have been sitting here and kind of smile and talk and things like that.
Dr. Suzanne Zeedyk has spent the past 6 years trying to understand what babies need for healthy development. The latest research shows that it's the quality of interaction between a child and a carer that's crucial, particularly during the first year.
Okay? All right. See, it's got this looking conversation going on. Baby's looking at mom's face. Eye gaze is really tight, smiling, really intense kind of looking here. Okay, so we've got the conversation going on. Hi, is it good? What the baby is getting from this kind of interaction is it's learning that that what it's doing has an impact on what other people are doing. So that when it looks at mom, mom looks back at it. That's the sort of thing that, although it's very, very subtle, it doesn't look like a lot, it's these kinds of things that are crucial to interaction at this age.
To show how a child's sense of well-being is dependent upon the quality of interaction, Dr. Zeedyk has asked this mother to stop responding to her baby. The child's reaction demonstrates what happens if it does not receive this kind of stimulation.
So here, Mom's face is now being held still. She's not responding to what the baby's doing. And you can start to see the discomfort there. You see how it looks away? It now looks really withdrawn, kind of like it checks back with Mom. She doesn't smile. It tries. It even tries to smile. She doesn't respond. Its smile goes away. The baby's looking down. It's not even trying to interact. If this goes on and on and on over a long term, you're going to get a withdrawn child who doesn't understand that other people will interact with it. And if it doesn't understand that other people interact with you, you don't have a healthy person.
So that's what Dr. Zeedyk thinks. This is not fancy photography. This is what 3-month-old babies do as soon as the mom stops taking turns. Babies come into the world connected. They're already able to have conversations. And there are lots of other examples that I could give of how babies come connected. This is an example of studies which were actually done with bumps before the baby got here. Babies come tuned in already to the music and the voices that are around them. So that if you test their heart rate calms in response to the theme tune of the soap opera that their mother has been watching while they're pregnant. And it turns out that if you tell the parents that, and you play that theme tune, the babies will go to sleep faster. So it's a really good parenting technique. And I can tell you stories about if you read stories to your bump, how the baby tunes into the stories and the sound of your voice. And I can tell you about stories where the baby tunes into the domestic violence, which has been going on around mother while she was carrying the baby. So whatever's going around the baby, while they're in the womb, they arrive in the world already tuned into and already with a brain that is connected to that. Right. Other examples, imitation is my favorite. It turns out that brand new babies will imitate your facial expressions. If you stick your tongue out at them, babies will stick their tongue out at you. They'll do it up to half an hour in rhythm, turn taking. This was a very major insight when science gained this. Once upon a time, we didn't think babies could do this, and now we know it's a basic skill that they bring with them. So if all of these are just examples of how babies arrive connected, what I want to stress is it doesn't go away when you cease to be a baby. It turns out that imitation, as an example, is really powerful for adults. So this is a study from the Journal of Hotel Administration. Who knew there was a scientific journal for hotel administration? It turns out that if you get the waiters and waitresses in your restaurant to imitate or mimic or mirror or whatever you might want to call it, the customers, and they do it in a way that isn't obvious, and that's an interesting story in that. How does it become like, if they do it in a way where it just feels corresponding, the customers give higher tips. So if any of you have children in university and you need them to help with themselves at university, get them to get a job as a college student and imitate customers, because the reason that happens is that you feel heard, you feel connected. The point is that this imitation, this connection that we bring with us, we can see evidence of lasting throughout adulthood. And I could have told you very interesting stories about how you can use this as a technique for working with children with autism or elderly people in care homes with dementia. Right. To try to capture this sense of how connected babies arrive, because many people don't know that they arrive already connected, my team's just come out with a DVD. So in other words, if you want more of this kind of video that I just showed you, we've now got a DVD out which just demonstrates it. And what Annie has said to me, and numbers of people, is, I just didn't know this. I wish I'd known this when I had wee ones. So if we can just give this kind of information to the parents of Colin, it starts to make a difference simply to know that babies are right connected. Right, well, once we get our heads around that, we then can begin to understand how brains are shaped by interaction. So I'm going to turn you all into neuroscientists in 5 minutes or less. Okay? This is the brain. It's oriented this way with the blue bit here in the front and the black bit above your spine. And there's a tremendous amount of really exciting information that we now have coming out of neuroscientific labs. But this is the most important information that you need to know as an early intervention community. And it is this. The brains arrive immature. Human brains do not arrive fully formed. Other organs do. Hearts and lungs and pancreases, now they get bigger, but they're fully formed. Brains are not. Brains are an organ that is purposely designed to develop after birth. And we now know that it develops more quickly between birth and 3 than it ever will again. Between birth and 1, 70% of brain mass is in place. And between birth and 3, 90% gets in place. Between birth and 3, 90% of final brain mass is in place. That's a period of time which we used to think wasn't very important, and we now realize is a crucial period of brain development. So how does that happen? This is the most important slide I have to show you today. These are 3 periods of brain development: birth, 15 months, 2 years, and what they show are neurons in the brain. So you can see these upside down hand-looking things? Those are neurons. Can you see how at birth there's space between them? And by 15 months they've begun to knit together, and by 2 years they'll wound around each other. That's brain development. And what happens in brain development is that neurons that fire together wire together. So if you have let's call it the doorknob neuron, and every time that fires when I see a doorknob being opened, what matters is what comes with it. So if every time the doorknob turns and that fires, someone walks through it and goes, "I missed you all day, come and give me a cuddle," you get doorknob cuddle, doorknob cuddle, doorknob cuddle. So you get a connection between those. Or you can have doorknob kicked, doorknob kicked, doorknob kicked. You get a motorway to anxiety around reunions, around doorknobs. So what we're asking ourselves is what kind of motorways, what kind of connections are we creating in the brains of our children? So let me just drive that home a tiny bit. I like to think of these as motorways in the brain. We all drive on motorways that take really fast traffic. That's what they're meant to do. Brains are meant to process traffic messages of the environment. The question becomes, do we have motorways to anxiety or motorways to joy? We will also have B-class roads to anxiety and to joy. But if we have a brain that has been wired on the basis of our experiences with a motorway to anxiety, we go to an anxious place very fast. So what we want for all our children, for the children of Colin, is to have motorways to joy and B-class roads to anxiety. And what we need to worry about are the children who had early experiences where they developed, by the age of 3, indeed by the age of 1, motorways to anxiety. And how can we help to keep them off motorways and onto B-class roads to joy? Right, so the brain really is a transport system. It's set up for particular climates, for particular emotional climates. The weather system that a brain is coping with is an emotional one. And what we need to worry about is if we have a society where we have a whole lot of brains wandering around that are equipped for stormy climates as opposed to sunny ones, because they create storms, they look for it. And that's what you're trying to help counter in Colin, is to be sure you don't have a lot of people wandering around with brains that are looking for storms. That's, in a sense, all you're trying to do. Right. To drive home this is the work of Bruce Perry. He's a neuroscientist in the States. And here, what he's done in this slide is to take CAT scans of 2 children. And a CAT scan looks down into your brain like this. They're both 3-year-olds. This is one that he's called a normal 3-year-old, and this is one who suffered extreme neglect. We often think of those as Romanian orphans. The point is, there are many children in all our communities who have suffered in neglect. We think of abuse often as physical abuse. We can spot that now, emotional abuse and physical abuse. What this is helping us to understand is that neglect has also a tremendous effect on the brain. That brain is simply smaller. And although there are things we can do for that brain, for that child, because this is a child, we can give them a speech and language therapist, we can give them a foster family, we can give them an after-school worker. That brain will never catch up to that brain now. That brain will always cost us money as a society because we missed that early period of growth. So sometimes I choose different language. This is a lucky child. This is an unlucky child. This is a child who experiences love as warm and safe. This is a child who experiences love as scary. It helps us to understand what is literally happening in brain growth. Right. I just want to stress as well, it's not just brains, it's also hormones. So So another thing that your body gets set up for in these early years is what kind of paving, what kind of tarmacking do I need on the road? Do I have a lot of roads to stress? In that case, I need a lot of cortisol. Cortisol is a stress hormone that helps us to cope in acute moments. So if anybody was late, you arrive with more cortisol in your system. If you have repeated experiences of stress, especially if you're a child, your developing brain is now cooking in a soup of cortisol. And it turns off your thermometer. There's a switch that helps you to turn on cortisol to cope with stress. So that actually, if you have too much stress as a child, you're unable to self-regulate your system later on. The other hormone that I really like, which is the opposite, is oxytocin. And that's something called the cuddle chemical. And you get that from being in the presence of people with whom you feel safe and trusted. The biggest boost is when you get cuddled. So if you stop for just a moment and think, is Colin a high cuddle community or not? In fact, you can put up hands. You have to vote one way or the other. If you think yes or no, you can change your mind in 2 minutes, but it helps you to know what you think about Colin at the moment. Do you think Colin is a high cuddle community at the moment? Put your hand up. Look around the room. Can I tell you, that's a really interesting response. We usually at least get one person putting their hand up. Now maybe that you're all shy, which is interesting because the parents earlier today put up their hands. Let me try the other way. Who thinks that Colin is not a high cuddle community? Look around the room. In that case, you are low in oxytocin. Your streets are not paved with oxytocin. Oxytocin lies at the heart of empathy. If you want to counter the violence and the struggles that you're having, you need more oxytocin. And the best way to get that is through cuddling. And that begins a very interesting debate. Are we uncomfortable about cuddling? Do we have... Often in nurseries, there can be implicit or explicit policies about cuddling. See? Listen to them. Lots of babies are put into nurseries at 6 weeks old now. Certainly at 9 months old is a standard time. If we have a policy against cuddling, what we are teaching children in our nursery care is that love and relationships are scary. Right. This is one of my favorite authors. This is Robin Grill. He talks about parenting for a peaceful world, and he raises something really interesting. He often uses the word resilience. He says children are not resilient. They do not bounce back unchanged, which is what we think resilience means. They are adaptive. So we can ask again, what are we asking them to adapt to through the services that we provide to them? Right. Does everybody get this idea of connections growing out of experience? In that case, I dubbed the all nursery neuroscientists, and you get the point. If you get the idea that we're connected and that our brains develop, we can now spend 2 minutes applying these ideas. Okay, there's tons of people who are now interested in the early years agenda. Here are some of them. These are the police. This is Strathclyde Police in Glasgow. The Scottish Violence Reduction Unit is now interested in babies. We're doing something different when the police are interested in babies. Here's health. This is our Chief Medical Officer in Scotland. He goes about the country talking about the way in which cancer, diabetes, stroke, heart disease, adult diseases are actually childhood diseases. Because the amount of cortisol you experience and other kinds of hormone sets up the likelihood of you getting one of these diseases, which we now pay money for through the health service. Right, care systems. Alan Sinclair, key economist, says that what we do to our children in care is uncivilized because we break these early relationships which lead them to experience love as scary. Right, education. These are the pre-birth guidelines, and I'm just using examples so you get a sense of where this debate is going on. When education is interested in pre-birth, we're on to an early years message and we're doing something different. Right, here's Westminster Parliament. This is the work of Graham Allen. He's produced 2 reports this year in which he looks at what kind of funding should go into earlier intervention programs. This is the Scottish Parliament. Our Finance Committee, not social work, not education, Finance Committee is interested in early intervention as preventative spending. Right. This is one of the most powerful reports that has come out recently. Both of these talk about mental well-being. This one, the blue one on your left, is UNICEF. UNICEF conducted a survey in 2007, and children in the UK came out at the bottom of Europe in terms of well-being. The bottom of Europe. Below Poland, below Romania, our adolescents come out at the bottom of Europe. And in the last month, UNICEF UK tried to follow this up to see why. Very interesting. They have concluded that what our children are lacking is our time and our attention as adults. It's materialism and parental working hours and energy. So, you want to do something that will really make a difference? Change maternity and paternity policies in Colin. Right, let me drive that home. This is the work of James Heckman, a Nobel-winning laureate economist. And what he has become interested in is where do we invest our money? So this shows the slope, the return on your investment is shown in this slope. If this is preschool, school, and post-school, what he's trying to see is where do you invest to get the biggest return on your investment. You can read that graph. It says invest in preschool. And very roughly, depending on what you measure, when you measure, it's very roughly something like 1 to 10, maybe 1 to 3, 1 to 7, maybe 1 to 40, 1 to 10. For every £1 you invest early on, you save something in the region of £10 later on. So that's really good financial sense. To get a return on your investment of 10%, Greece would love at the moment. Italy would love at the moment. This is how we currently spend our money. This is dumb. And sometimes people say to me, don't you mean unwise? Dumb's a bit. Don't you mean unwise? Don't you mean unthought out? No, I mean dumb. This is dumb. So if we're not investing in the early years, we're both wasting our money and we're having people who are more unhappy. Why would we do that? For those of you who hold budgets in this room, can I help you to feel braver? This is the message we've got. We've got the idea that if we invest now, we save later. So if we invest now, in 15 years' time, we stop somebody from stabbing each other and putting them in prison. I do not think this is the full story. I think this is the story. If we think about what we measure in terms of financial outcome, we will discover that if we invest now, we save now, and we save later as well. And let me illustrate that. This is the work for some of my work with parenting support groups, which when we were doing this, we estimated cost £200. This is now a few years ago, be a bit more, but at the time, £200 per family for a 6-week course. This is what one of our parents said 3 years on. Probably the most unexpected thing I got was from Pals was keeping my son. I know that doesn't sound nice, but I honestly think if Pals hadn't been there, I'd have given up. She means she'd have had him put in care because she wasn't coping. It's 3 years down the line, it's working perfectly. We estimate it costs us £200, it costs £30,000 to keep a child in care. So Dundee City Council saved £29,800 in that year, but they don't know it because we saved it to them, because it's hidden. So if you want to do something creative in Colin, figure out how to measure hidden savings. This is not rocket science, this is baby science. We can send people to the moon, we can figure out how to measure money in new ways, and then we realize the results that we are getting, because at the moment we often measure the costs without measuring the savings. And as we remove money from early years input, we actually cost ourselves more in other places. But it's often hard to see because we have these budgetary silos, where if we save money, say we put money into health and social care, if we're saving money in education, if we can't get those budgets to cross, we guard our budgets. So here's another creative thing you can do. Figure out how to make the money work in a different way. If we get locked into budgetary silos, we can't free ourselves up of the problems that you are so creatively trying to tackle. And then you can have the rest of the world to know how to get out of our budgetary silo problems as well. So in conclusion, we started here. What you are doing is paving the streets in love. And here's one more way to think about it. You are all professionals. You're also parents. And I know at the moment you're going, wait a second, what did I do with my child? What did my person do? Here's what's interesting about this. You came into the room as professionals with your professional hat on. As soon as you start to talk about early years, that hat comes off and you become parents. Amongst all the problems we are currently having as a society, the thing that goes straight to our heart is our relationship with our children. And I think often the early years message scares us. So part of what we have to tackle is what it tells us about ourselves. And so we have to get over the fact that what we did in the early, if our children are too old and they're no longer 2, we have to face ourselves what it meant to us to parent. So we have to we have to see this not just as supporting children, but supporting both young parents and ourselves in terms of what kind of world do we want. Right. You are professionals when you enter this room, though. You deliver services. We need services that deliver relationships, not services. If we think that delivering services is enough, it's not. If it hasn't achieved relationships, we didn't solve what we set out to do. And indeed, we can then turn around and say, we need services that deliver love, not services. So you are all in the love delivery. Thank you very much.